Hey everyone, I am back. It's Dr. Hammond here with your mental health moment, and I hope that you've had a really great week. Um, for those of you who are new to Mental Health Moment, welcome. It's Dr. Hammond here with your Mental Health Moment. And for those of you who tune in every Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, welcome back. Thanks so much for you all joining. For those of you who tried to tune in last Tuesday, and thanks for those who are starting to join here. For those of you who tried to tune in last Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I do apologize. I was on a flight. I thought that a pre-recording was going to go through right at 8 o'clock, but of course, technology, that did not happen as I learned. So I apologize for that. And hi, thanks for those who are starting to join here. It's Dr. Hammond here with your mental health moment. So I apologize for that. But this week, of course, as we know, the first Tuesday of every month on Mental Health Moment is specifically devoted to children's mental health. And good evening to you as well. Thanks for those who are starting to join here, because of so much that's really been happening, especially to our youth, particularly these last couple of years when it comes to mental health. And thanks for those who are still starting to join here. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share some tips with you. Again, if you're new to Mental Health Moment, you do not have to be a parent necessarily. But if you know of someone who works with children, maybe you have a niece, nephew, godchild, or whomever it is, or someone else that you know needs this information related to children, then you can always invite them to join again every first Tuesday of the month for Mental Health Moment, specifically devoted to children's mental health. And good afternoon to you as well. Thanks for those who are starting to join here. So today I am going to give you a couple of quick tips when it comes to children's mental health related specifically to ADHD, because there's really a lot of misinformation out there about ADHD. That's actually one of my subspecialties. I've seen a lot of children with ADHD. I've seen a lot of children who have been mislabeled as having ADHD, and they really had some type of trauma that was going on with them, or they had some type of learning issue that was happening, or just some type of stress going on in their lives, and they had a really hard time concentrating, or they had some behavioral issues, right? So there's a lot of things that ADHD looks like, which is why it's often confused as something else. And hi, welcome. I love I love when you all put all these emojis in the chat. It's adorable. So thank you. Welcome to you from California here. From Baltimore is in the house. Welcome, and thanks so much for joining here. So a couple of tips. So one is, again, this could be related to someone in your life or someone who works with children, who is concerned if a particular child or teen may have ADHD. The first thing that I would always suggest is that this particular youth goes to a pediatrician or a family care physician, because there's a lot of physical health conditions that look like attention issues, and a lot of people don't know that. And actually, that's the same for us as adults. So always be sure to make sure that your physicals are up to date. Always make sure physically that you know what's happening with you. And I know we talked about that at a couple mental health moments ago, because there are things like low blood sugar that children have, that can affect their attention. There's thyroid issues for some kids. They have genes, right, that are more likely hereditary, to more likely have thyroid issues. There's vitamin deficiencies. There's so many different things that can affect our kids that look like attention problems, and not everything is ADHD. If you get anything from today's mental health moment, I want you to remember that not every single child out there has ADHD. Some kids do, and some do not. They have something else that's happening to them, that's causing them to have the attention problems, the maybe hyperactivity, not everybody, or some impulsivity issues. And thanks for joining here. I see someone's here from Florida. from LA, from North Carolina's in the house. A couple North Carolina people are in the house. Rhode Island's here. So welcome, welcome. It's Dr. Hammond here with your mental health moment. And today, being the first Tuesday of the month, we talk about children's mental health. So today it's about ADHD. So again, first step is definitely to seek out the care of a primary care physician, whether it's a pediatrician, family physician, to make sure that this child doesn't actually have some physical health concerns. The second thing is to really think about, and it really depends on the area, honestly, geographically, and what that means and cost and all these things. But to think about a psychological evaluation and what that is. A lot of people don't know, but a comprehensive psychological evaluation for a child can be really, really beneficial. That's something I've done for since 2009 when I first started my practice, my psychology practice, because it's a great way to see how is this child functioning, and not just for ADHD, but what is their IQ? Like, what is their potential to learn? How are they doing reading, writing, math? Socially, emotionally, how are they doing? If they're older, there's personality tests, not the personality tests on Google, you all. Ugh, I cringe. There's so many personality tests out there that are just not valid scientific instruments. There are all sorts of things all over social media. I would probably say 99% of that stuff is definitely not things that licensed psychologists are using in practice. So just be aware of that. But instead, there are reputable, um, well researched tools that psychological evaluations can show for kids that might have ADHD or something else of what is happening with them. Because a lot of kids I've seen, again, some kids have depression. I don't know about you, but if there's ever been a time in your life when you've been sad about something, haven't you had moments where you can't concentrate on something? So maybe you couldn't concentrate at work, or you couldn't concentrate at home, or you couldn't concentrate in school, and your mind was on whatever it was on that was making you upset and making you sad as an adult. That's the same thing that happens to kids sometimes. So what looks like ADHD, they're not paying attention, they're not doing their schoolwork. Well, it's depression. Or for some kids, it's anxiety. Um, I have met so many kids, it's so sad, you all, that have really struggled with the pandemic, that have really struggled with all sorts of factors related to the pandemic, whether it was, I mean, back in 2020, all of us really, I'm sure, on some level had some anxiety thinking about, are we going to get COVID? Who around us is sick? And you find it felt like every minute it was like, oh, someone has COVID. I remember even through the news, you hear the celebrities have COVID, and one by one, or maybe you got a text message or a phone call. What somebody in your family had COVID. Like it was like this, who's going to get it next, and how do we take care of ourselves? And is there a vaccine? And then the vaccine came out. There's just so many things that were happening during that time. And for our kids, especially, think about, we if we were stressed out as adults, think about the children, right? Think about these kids that are supposed to be worrying about cartoons and video games and school and things like that. That's what little kids are supposed to be worried about. And teenagers are supposed to be worried about going out with their friends and having a good time. But instead, they were and still many children and teens very concerned about this pandemic, very very anxious socially, very anxious of whether or not they're going to die, for some of them, from COVID. And it may look a little bit different now a couple years in, but I can promise you there's still a very high level of anxiety. For our little crowd, for the little really young ones, I mean, I think about, I was just speaking to this group a couple weeks ago in Tampa, and it was a group that worked particularly with early childhood education areas. And I can't imagine, even the youngest preschool kids, how they lost out really, like, on a couple years of their social development. So for those kids, and I understand some kids are going to be homeschooled, and that's fine. But for those kids whose parents said they were going to send them to school, and then they didn't get a chance to go to school and to interact and have that social development, really, I mean, that was a lost opportunity. And again, you can make it up socially, but all these things were happening, which again, all of these types of things look like ADHD. So I've seen a lot of kids that have social anxiety. Again, that looks like ADHD. So which is why I'm a huge proponent, and again, it's something I've done for over a decade of doing psychological evaluations, of making sure to thoroughly look at different parts of this person, having a full conversation with family members, getting teacher input. There's so many different parts of it because one of the things that I always preach and at the what well throughout the last couple of years, especially after COVID and a lot of places I've been speaking in, I'm really wanting to remind people of how important it is for us to look at the whole child. Meaning, even when I have a family that might come in and say, okay, I want to know if my child has ADHD. It's really, really important though, and you can answer that question through psychological evaluations, let's say, and a lot of other different measures. But I'm also looking at the whole picture, the whole child, right? Because here's the thing: when you go to get blood work done, there is no way in the world that your doctor would ever come back with a blood work panel with one thing that they looked at. They would never do that, right? That's not, of course, you've probably seen your blood work statement, and there's all sorts of things. Half of it, honestly, are a lot of different acronyms and different parts that we may not even understand. But the point is, it's thorough. It looks at all different parts of what is going on with you physically. And that's the same thing that is important. Also, we owe it to our children to make sure that we are looking at them as a whole. What are they going through? What was their life like during COVID? Again, there's a lot of different uh, possibilities, depending on resources, depending on geographic location, how bad was COVID in that area, what did the family go through? I mean, so there's a lot of different parts to think about. But that's something I want you really to think about and maybe share with someone. If you know someone that's like, oh, I don't know if my child has ADHD or not, or maybe they work with child or children, to really think about, again, first heading to the pediatrician or some type of physician to make sure there's not something physically going on. And then thinking about also a psychological evaluation if it's feasible, to really get a bigger idea or a more comprehensive idea of what's going on with this child. And then the third part of it is to really think about, like, what do you do next, right? Uh what is the treatment if a child has ADHD? And actually the CDC, they say, which I strongly agree with, and I see it all the time and a lot of kids that I test, but they say that about 2/3 or so of kids that have ADHD actually have something else too. So even for kids and teens that have ADHD, they might also have a learning issue, they might have depression, they might have anxiety, they might have a behavioral issue. Like, there's usually something else going on too, which is why I'm a huge fan. I know I'm a little biased because I do them myself, the psychological evaluations, but I'm a like a huge advocate for making sure that we fully understand what is going on with this child. Um, and and hi, for those who are still starting to join here, is Dr. Hammond here with your mental health moment. Good morning to you as well from Kenya. It's evening for me, but I understand obviously this is a global community. So good morning to you on the other side of the world. And hi from West Africa, Tennessee, North Virginia, Ghana, New York City. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Alaska's in the house. That's pretty cool. Actually, I have heard that it's absolutely beautiful there. Side note. And that's actually one of the states that I want to head to because I heard it's just amazingly beautiful there. Hi from a couple people from Florida. So welcome, welcome. Texas is in the house as well. Yep. And someone said, so often children of color are misdiagnosed with ADHD. Why is that? Great question. It's very interesting, the data actually, when it comes specifically to children of color with ADHD, because believe it or not, depending on the community, it's very mixed. The data is very mixed. So in some communities, children are misdiagnosed because, again, I can't tell you how many times there's this quick idea. There's certain providers, I'm not saying for all, but certain providers will take 5 minutes to say, yep, you have ADHD, and have not done any thorough assessment or taken any other variables into account, and quickly diagnose ADHD. And that happens a lot with children of color. But then in other communities, it's actually the opposite. And children are not diagnosed as they should be with ADHD, and instead they're labeled with behavioral issues. They have ODD, which is oppositional defiant disorder, and it really impacts grades. It impacts academically. I can go on and on, y'all, but children of color are treated differently. I mean, across the board when it comes to punishment, when it comes to suspensions, referrals. So it really is a huge issue when it's actually not diagnosed properly, because in theory, if it were diagnosed and you understand what the condition is you're dealing with, then hopefully you'd be treating it, or at least a school would be aware. And there's so many things that schools can do, you all, for children that have ADHD. Honestly, it depends on the school. I'm not going to lie. Some schools are amazing. I'm not naming any schools, but some schools are absolutely amazing at getting kids accommodations, modifications with their curriculum, doing things, whatever they can to help this child with ADHD. And other schools, not so much, which is an issue in the education system. But I hope that answers your question. It really is mixed data. So in some communities, children of color definitely underdiagnosed, and in other communities, misdiagnosed, which either way, that is an issue. And both ways it affects kids. So thank you for your question. Someone said, my grandson fared pretty good due to his dad and mom, but me fell apart because children are suffering and parents and those who love and care for our babies suffered equally. And I think, I'm assuming you're talking about the reaction maybe to having a child with ADHD, let's say. You know what's interesting about that? I've had such mixed reactions from families. If a child, again, I test kids, sometimes they have ADHD, sometimes they don't, sometimes there's something else, sometimes there's a combination of things. There's a variety of, it's test data, so there's a variety of possibilities. But typically, I actually get a really positive reaction from the families, because they're actually like pretty grateful to be like, oh, this is what's happening with my child. Thank goodness I learned that my child has a learning issue, or they had depression or anxiety or ADHD or whatever it was, so that they can move on and be on the step to help this child. Because a lot of times we're trying to help children, but we're really not treating the right thing, which is a problem. If you have high blood pressure and your doctor gave you medicine or insulin for diabetes, right? Like that wouldn't make any sense, right? You can't, or you're getting blood pressure medication and you really have diabetes. Like, it's not going to work. But this is what happens, you all. I know I'm getting on my soapbox tonight, but this is what happens over and over and over to kids. We quickly label, they get treated for something they don't even have. And then it's like, we don't understand what's going on. Well, they didn't have ADHD in the first place. So if you're giving ADHD medication, but they really have a learning disability, it's not really going to necessarily help them. So again, I'm just speaking from over a decade of seeing the same things over and over, which is why a mental health mom, I'm sharing, not only sharing these stories, but sharing this information with you, so that hopefully we can get into a pattern of prevention for our kids, and help them. But I definitely want to answer your questions as well. Someone said, can psychological evaluations be considered a wellness visit? I fear my child being misdiagnosed or mislabeled. So no, they can't be considered a wellness visit, because typically at a wellness visit, let's say with a pediatrician, then, what the pediatrician or physician can do is they can do blood work, they can do any type of screeners, and it's a little controversial, but there are some pediatricians, yes, that do ADHD testing technically, which is a quick screener. You fill out a form, and a teacher may fill out a form. So technically, yes. Do I like that idea? Not really. It's better than nothing, but I would prefer, again, there's resources involved. A lot of times insurance companies don't cover different types of testing. So I understand that is a barrier, but to get a comprehensive evaluation, you're understanding more than just um, what the teacher thought on a form and what you think on a form for ADHD specifically. Again, it's like getting blood work for one thing, and then it says yes, ADHD or no, and you know nothing else. That doesn't help when we think about looking at the whole child. I've seen kids who are gifted, very high IQs, and they have a learning disability. I've seen kids that are very low IQs and they have ADHD, or high IQs, ADHD. Like, there's so many possibilities, which is why testing is so important. But yeah, great question. Fear child being misdiagnosed or mislabeled. So what I will say is that it's more it's easier. I mean, just being frank with you and honest with you, it's easier to mislabel when you don't have a lot of information. And it's not really, well, let me take a step back. It's easier to, not, I wouldn't say misdiagnosed, but almost underdiagnosed. Again, if you only have information, if you're testing for one thing, which is ADHD, and that's it, you could say yes or no for ADHD, but you're missing like four other things that may be going on with this child, which is a problem. Because if you have behavior problems and you're not learning, and now you need to repeat a grade, and now you're making C's, D's, and F's, all these things are going to keep happening if you're only treating one thing and half the other things have been forgotten about. So some kids, as I mentioned, they might have ADHD, they also have anxiety, they're sad, and they have a learning disability. You're not going to get that information from two forms that just look at whether or not they have ADHD. And those other things are important. If we're, which I'm going to talk to you guys about soon too, but if you think about the treatment aspect, so important. I can't tell you, oh, I can't tell you, I want to like scream from the rooftops. I can't tell you how important it is for you to be getting children help early. I like, I'm glad, I'm happy when any child gets an assessment, no matter how old they are. However, for kids I test later on in life, it might be late high school, or it might be early college years or after high school years. And they're like, man, I've been having this issue for like 6, 7, 8 years. That is heartbreaking to me, because I know if they had gotten the information, if their families had known earlier about what was going on with them, all the things that happened to them potentially could have been prevented. Like the heartbreak, the suspensions, referrals, the behavior problems, the conflict with family, all of that potentially could have been prevented if, right, we knew the information, whatever the information was that came out of the psychological evaluation happened earlier, which is why I'm always screaming like, please do the evaluation as soon as possible. So yeah, so great question. Um, No worries at all. Someone said I missed the lesson on last week. I went to New Orleans as this was my last summer trip before school starts next week. No problem whatsoever, because actually, if you're joining a little bit late in the beginning, I told you that there was a technical issue anyhow, because I was on a flight and I thought that the pre-recorded was going through, but apparently did not. So I apologize, at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time last week. So no worries whatsoever. Greetings to you as well for Sierra Leone. Welcome. Someone said, when my daughter was in kindergarten, she was ahead of the curve, so she wasn't paying attention in class. Yep, see that all the time too. Kind of zoning out in her own world. And I told the teacher she's bored because we covered so much at home, but the teacher wanted her to get tested for ADHD. I declined. Turns out she needed more challenging work. She ended up being a grade level and a half above the current level she was being taught at. Problem solved. I also see that all the time. I have tested kids, same thing. They're gifted level, and some kids are so bored out of their minds in school, just being honest. Again, if you're functioning at like a 6th grade level and you're in a 3rd or 4th grade class, you're bored and you're trying to do the work, but like you're already done. You're done when half the kids are still working on their test or their assignment. It's boring. And for some kids, it causes behavior problems because they're like, oh, what else can I do? And they look like they're not paying attention. or they simply tune the teacher out because they already know the information. So that's why I love, again, the evaluations. I have seen, again, IQ tests where kids are already in the gifted range. They're not even in the right placement when it comes to school. Very important. That's another piece. Or the reverse. I mean, it's fine. Like some kids have average IQ, but they have other needs and they need to have the right classroom to help them best in school. So yeah, so great point. I see that all the time. Um, yeah, someone said, "What is happening to our children is unbelievable. We used to have safe houses for young people. The parents' relationships have changed. While the worst parts of society are being destructive, the people that ensure they have money is ensuring that levels of children are being ruined physically and mentally. It is not that difficult to change, but the level of fear is unrealistic." So yes, and the other part of it is, gosh, there really are pros and cons to having a label. That's something I talk to many families about. Um, well, first of all, if you get about a psychological evaluation for a child, that whole process is confidential anyway. So, as a psychologist, we are not allowed without written permission from a parent to disclose any information. Frankly, there's a couple of exceptions. If a child's in danger or trying to hurt themselves or someone's hurting them, things like that. But generally, nothing out of that conversation is being disclosed. I don't go to the school and say, "Oh, this child has ADHD or depression or whatever it is," because I don't have any authority to do so without the parent's permission. So it is something I do stress to families that are like, yeah, I need that evaluation to at least get it done to know whether or not you decide to disclose it to anybody else, frankly, your family members, your friends, the school is a parent choice or a caregiver choice. However, to your point, there's this stigma on different labels, especially when it comes to mental health for children. But it's problematic sometimes because, again, there are some great schools that are willing to do things that can help kids. And let me tell you, man, when I've seen kids go from like C's, D's to like straight A's, for example, simply because they had the right accommodations, which just means different changes and how the school did things. Like that's amazing, right? Because that's frustrating for a kid to be smart and not even necessarily straight A's. It could be A's and B's, but they just improve so much, right? They don't get in trouble anymore. Like all these things stop happening in a good way, like getting in trouble, uh, because they have what they need in school. So thanks for bringing that up because that's very true. Someone said, "Yep, you have to be a strong advocate for your child as you would be for yourself. You have to put your foot down and insist that they do the right evaluation, and don't be afraid to get a second opinion." Absolutely. Um, and you do. That's something that I also stress a lot to families. You have to absolutely be a strong advocate. Um, the third part of what I wanted to share with you all today. So again, for those of you who are just joining here, we're talking today about ADHD for kids and teens. And the first thing, again, to think about getting to the physician, making sure there's no physical health issues going on. Secondly, psychological evaluation if resources allow. Third thing is then the next steps are treatment for whatever it is that's happening with this child, whether it's ADHD, depression, anxiety, learning disability, or whatever it is in the world of mental health that's happening with this child. So it is important to be an advocate there. When it comes to treatment, again, I always think of whole child. Um, Probably not, I need to start doing slides on these mental health moments for you all. But I always think of the whole child. So again, how are they doing physically? How are they doing academically? How are they doing socially, emotionally? How are they doing spiritually? Like how as a whole are they doing? And then you can put into place the treatment they need for that particular area they're struggling with. So for example, some kids, they struggle socially uh, with whatever they have, if it's ADHD, depression, anxiety, autism, whatever the condition may be. So some kids need a social skills group, for example, where they are practicing their social skills with a group. Or some kids are not ready for group and they need to do that in a one-on-one setting in therapy. Um, or a child may have issues with their self-esteem. I meet so many kids, it's sad, it's hard, but I meet so many kids who struggle because of whatever condition they have with mental health. So their self-esteem is affected, unfortunately. We don't want it to get to that point. I'm always like, let's try to do some prevention work here. But if it is to that point, maybe they need therapy to know like you can still be amazing just because you have ADHD or depression, anxiety, a learning issue, or whatever it is you have, you still could be an amazing kid. You still have a lot of strengths, right? And they need to hear that from someone else sometimes. That's not their parent or caregiver because they're like, yeah. You're just saying that because you're my family member. But they need to understand that. And sometimes it's just deeply rooted with other things or trauma, but they may need individual therapy. And then there's a lot of parent skills training, meaning it doesn't ever mean like someone's a bad parent. It just means that, hey, you need information, whether it's a group or individual therapy, to know how do I best help this child. So that could be parent sessions. So and I can go on, but there's a lot of different ways to approach different types of therapy and different types of resources. The main thing is to understand how is this child affected, again, whether it's ADHD. I know we're talking about ADHD today, but whether it is ADHD or something else, where are they struggling? Where are they not functioning as well in? Because again, I have kids that are like amazing academically, socially they're struggling. Or I have, the opposite. They're falling apart emotionally, doing well in school, or they're falling apart academically, but they're okay emotionally. Like there's just different variations. So how is this child doing? And someone says, what measures do the schools take for kids who have ADHD? Great question. And good evening. Thanks for those who are starting to join here. What measures do the schools take for kids who have ADHD? It really depends on the school, but a lot of schools, it depends on the school, and it also depends on the grade level. So elementary schoolers have different accommodations or modifications than like a high schooler, let's say. So though, let's say elementary schooler, let's say they're struggling with, which I see a lot of kids with that, with like organization, like getting their homework in their backpack, getting the homework at school, putting it where it needs to be, things like that, or they're losing things. They don't know where their pencil is. They don't know, where did I put my backpack? Where did I put this? Like they're just struggling with organization. Then that is something that the school can work on, like a certain system to really help them with that. For some kids, they're just highly distracted. So they have to sit up front near the teacher. So they're not seeing all these, 20, 30 other kids in their classroom, and they're wondering what this person's doing, that person's doing, right? So we reduce distractions. For the older crowd, it again depends on the school, but there's a lot of different things. There's note-taking services that can happen. They can limit the amount of homework. If the student is overwhelmed, it doesn't make sense. If it's supposed to take 20 minutes for a child and it's taking them 2 hours to do that assignment because they just cannot, they have the severe level of ADHD, that's not really fair to them. So a lot of times they can reduce the amount of homework, and it wouldn't be to the point where they're not learning as much. It would just really help them to reduce the frustration. So those are just some examples. There's a lot more. And actually, a good website to see other type of accommodations for ADHD or other conditions for kids is called helpguide.org also really has good information. And also there was another one, Chad .org as well as CHADD.org. I believe it's .org. You can put it in the chat. Someone can put it in the chat. But they have a lot of great information as well for, actually children and adults with ADHD and those types of resources. But there's a lot that schools can do. I can go on and on, but there's a lot that schools can do. It just really, it really takes a conversation and an advocate, as someone was saying, to make sure that that the necessary resources are in place and that they're getting a customized plan that works for them, depending on their needs. Great questions. Someone said, can lack of vitamins and minerals be a part of the issue? So that's a great question. Actually, probably more of a pediatrician question. I would say that I have, I guess, a pediatrician colleague who really stands by the idea. And again, probably honestly, if you ask around, you're going to get a difference of opinion. But I did have a pediatrician colleague who really strongly believes that there's a lack of supplements or vitamins, and just physically how children physically the issues that children are having are contributing to ADHD type of symptoms. That's what she's seen in her work. And I really think though it's important again to head to the physician to check all of that, check vitamins, a very thorough evaluation. Most little kids are not getting blood tests and things like that. But if ADHD or some other mental health issue is a concern, I still always recommend to get as thorough as you can that information to find out, is there anything lacking in this, in this child physically as well. So yeah, great question. Someone said, I have a young adult that needs help now, but she will not go to get help. How can I advocate for a young 25 years old presenting what looks like schizophrenia? All they do is eat and stay in their room. What steps can I take to get her moving towards getting help? Yeah, and it's, it is really tough. So obviously today we're talking about children and teens, a little bit easier. But the adult ages, it is a bit harder because, they are legally an adult. You can strongly suggest help. Obviously, if for individuals, especially during this pandemic time that I've seen that I've really struggled to leave the house, frankly, for a lot of different reasons, including a high level of anxiety, I usually like to recommend that that person, if they're open to it, maybe do telehealth, some type of virtual visit, and just see if they're able to at least handle that. If not, because that way they don't even have to leave their room, right? You could be in your pajamas and do therapy nowadays with all of the virtual resources that are out there. If they still don't want to do that though, then honestly, the best thing to do as a community is to find the resources that can be as supportive as possible to them. Because unfortunately, not everyone is open to therapy. I wish I had a magic wand and everyone was open. But that's just not the reality. So we try to advocate, try different levels. If it's like, okay, you don't even have to leave your room, try to speak to a therapist virtually through a computer or even a cell phone. If not, again, like I said, doing different type of wraparound services, supportive as you can be is going to be really helpful. And also helpguide.org has good information about how to support someone who has a mental health issue. So that's a great question. Someone said, let me see. My grandson has ADHD and he's only given his medicine when he's with his mother and not when he's with my son. Can that be problematic? Yes, it can. So I would, in that case, so I don't prescribe any medication. So I'm a psychologist, not a psychiatrist. But I would definitely recommend in general, if someone's having that issue, to think about consulting the physician, whoever's prescribing medication, so that they can see how to best rectify that situation. It sounds to me, again, I don't prescribe medication, but it sounds like it would present an issue. But again, definitely a conversation that needs to happen with the physician, and then they can assess like how to best help. But yeah, great question. Someone said group can give them the ability to see that they're not the only one. I see building friends, understanding why they have this without feeling alone, and it builds confidence. It does. It really does. Even in public, someone said, even in public schools, the help varies according to where the schools are located. And that's really not fair at all for low income families of any color. They should get the help they need, regardless of if the government is paying for it. Couldn't agree with you more. I literally can talk for 3 hours on that. When I was in graduate school, well, way long ago, it feels like yesterday, but I was a substitute teacher, and I worked at what they called like high need schools. I worked at rated A schools, everything in between. So I saw a lot of different type of schools in the same community. Hillsborough County is, I don't even know, I think we're ranked 8th or something like that in the country. We have a really large school district in Tampa area is where Hillsborough County is, Tampa, Florida area, and beyond a couple other cities, obviously. But yeah, I saw a lot. There's a massive level of difference, like you said, unfortunately. And it really is the case. There's some schools that are like horribly have a horrible set or lack of, I should say, resources. So kids are struggling because there's a lack of resources, mental health resources, educational resources within certain communities, whereas other schools are like thriving and have the latest technology and all these types of things. So unfortunately, to your point, the schools are not at all equal when it comes to mental health resources, when it comes to educational needs, which is a problem. Um, but my hope, hopefully, and again, I don't want to get on my soapbox too much tonight here, but I really hope that, because that is just the case, that we as a community can make sure that we're doing what we can to support schools that need more help. But yes, thank you for bringing that. Very, very true. Someone said breastfed versus formula. I'm not sure. I'm not sure your question. I'm not sure if that's related to. Yeah, I'm not sure your question on that one. Someone said, I'm most concerned that a child diagnosed will have that diagnosis follow or even hinder them from getting into a good college. Should I worry about that? So it's interesting. It's interesting because I also do evaluations for students that are going into college that actually need of accommodations for college, meaning they might need more time on their exams. They might need more time to complete homework, assignments, and all that sort of thing. Because, of course, college can be stressful with a lot of demands, and it can be a lot harder if a child has, or a teenager has, depression, anxiety, a learning issue, ADHD, or whatever it is. So I see a lot of the opposite where, yeah, where teens are trying to get, the reports or whatnot that will demonstrate whether or not they have a condition that they need help in college. Now, typically, I mean, I don't know of any yeah, I don't know at the, like, undergraduate level. I'm not aware of any college saying like, "Hey, we need to know your psychiatric diagnoses," because generally this information is confidential unless you choose to disclose it. But what I've seen, again, I don't want to speak for all colleges, but a lot of colleges that I have worked with have been very accommodating to children, or I mean to teenagers, sorry, going into college that have had, different mental health conditions. A lot of colleges have like a disability office that provides different resources that'll say, hey, we'll take, the psychological evaluation results, for example, we'll try to help this student, and here's how we can help you. If we need to do, I don't know. There's a lot of different things they do at the college level. But if we need to help you with note taking, if we need to help you with organization or whatever it is that the student needs extra time on tests, usually is the case. So I wouldn't necessarily worry about that. But again, yeah, 9 times out of 10, like, confidentiality is pretty strong. HIPAA is your best friend. Usually, again, most times a student, or not, well, if a student's over 18, obviously they have the legal right as an adult, but as younger than that, a parent has a right whether or not to disclose the information when it comes to different schools, even at the elementary, middle, high school ages. So hopefully that answers your question. um, Someone said upscale communities tend to have better resources allocated to them versus communities suffering from disparities. Absolutely true. um so whew, very, very true. And what I will say to that again is there's a lot of different there's a lot of different reasons. And I don't want to get into all of them because that would take me 3 hours literally. But because of stigma of mental health, because of there's a lot of barriers, unfortunately, to resources. There's a lack of education in a lot of communities because, I mean, because of lack of funding, because of a lot of different reasons. So, though, I will say again that I hope that each and every one of you, in some way, I'm just going to put on my I guess my ask for today. Will think about that and think about how to help schools that may be struggling. I mean, there's so many needs at certain schools. Whether you could even bring in like a ream of paper, like that's how. I mean, every little thing counts, is what I'm saying. Like if it's a ream of paper, if it's pencils. I mean, my church for I don't even know how many years. It's been a long time, over a decade. With our outreach community, we try to help with backpack drives and school supplies. I mean, there's usually a lot of school supply drives in a lot of different communities. Like however you can help. These are the ways, because I don't at all want to make this a political conversation, but I will say that I don't agree with like, let's just wait on like magical funding to happen for these schools that are definitely have a lack of resources. So I encourage you as a community to think about how can you watching this, or someone or a company or whomever, help these schools also with, again, school supplies or whatever their needs are, because there are a lot of ways that we can help as a community as well. And I've seen like tremendously amazing things from communities, like getting involved and making changes in schools, which warms my heart all the time. So I just would suggest that to you. So that's my ask to you. As school is rapidly approaching, I know for us next week, I can't believe it. In Hillsborough County, our schools are starting, which is crazy that the summer just flew by. But I would encourage you to really think about that within your own communities. Again, however you can help. So if you have $5, that counts. If you have $50, 100, 1,000, a million, I don't know. It doesn't matter how much. Every single thing counts. But make sure that you're giving back to local schools, especially for schools that are definitely in need. Yeah. In Jesus' name, amen. Bless our kids in school. Yes, thank you for that. So this is the longest mental health moment ever. No, I'm just kidding. But thanks for those who stuck through for this longer mental health moment. Thank you for all of your questions. I'm more than happy to answer them. If you do have any questions that I didn't get to today, or you think of afterwards, you can always reach out on social media. Usually Instagram, Dr. Hammond is where I spend most of my time, but you can also reach me on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. What else am I on? Feel like I'm missing one. Pretty much all social media platforms. I'm on there. So you can always send me a message, or you can go to drnikishahammond.com if you have any questions or need to reach me otherwise. Yes, great point. Someone said, and please review the emergency plan with your child's school. Yes, very important. But thanks so much again. And I will see you all next Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on Black Women Empowered Incorporated Facebook page, YouTube, and LinkedIn Live. Have an amazing week, and I'll see you all next time. Bye, y'all.